Second half of section 11.1, complete the square. All right, this is really fun, but it's a bit complex, so hang tough with me. Here we go. So when you complete the square, what you're looking for is you want a perfect square. And you want a perfect square trinomial specifically, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be solving equations by completing the square. We're going to be solving an equation, and we want to be able to take the square root of both sides like we did in the last lesson. So what you'll do is you'll look to see, well, in this term, x squared plus 6x, what would you add to x squared plus 6x to get a perfect square? And remember, a perfect square is where you've got x plus something and x plus the same thing, and it's exactly the same. So what we could do is this. We want to see what number multiplies to go here and adds together to get 6. Well, we want to add together to get 6, and we want it to be the same thing. So we want half of that. So half of 6 is 3. And so our number, our binomial that we're squaring is x plus 3. So my term that I'm going to add here is going to be 3 plus 3, which is 9. All right. So what we've just done is we've just added something, and that's what the first section of your homework is simply going to be. What number do you add to make this a perfect square, and then factor it into a perfect square? So for right now, we're just going to ignore this. So what you'll be given is x squared plus 6x. What do you add to that to make it into a perfect square trinomial? What you'll do is this. Step 1, you'll take half of the x term and then square it. So first step, half of the x term, and then step 2, square it. That's it. And that's the number you'll add. And then when you do that, then when you factor it back out, you're going to end up with half of that middle term is going to be what you squared to get that. So that's going to be your second term in the binomial when you square it. All right? So we'll do a few so that you can see. So once you've done that, then what we'll do is we'll solve this equation. And so we can add, once again, we can add anything we want to the equation as long as we do the same thing to both sides. I know I say that every time, but it's true every time. So we can add 9 to this side of the equation as long as we add 9 to this side of the equation as well. All right? So then when we do that, now what we've done is we've made this side into a perfect square trinomial. It's x plus 3 times x plus 3, which is just x plus 3 squared, right? And now on this side, we still have 9, 10, 11. So x plus 3 squared is 11. And now this looks like a problem that we solved in the last lesson. So now you've got a squared term equals something. So just take the square root of it. So x plus 3 equals, don't forget, plus or minus the square root of 11. And now we just subtract 3. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 11. Ta-da! There, you're done. Okay, let me give you the steps. Write down the steps. All right, so for completing or I guess not just completing, but solving by completing the square. So to solve by completing the square, there's 6 steps, and I've broken it down into little, so there's a lot of steps, but this way hopefully it'll be very understandable. So step 1, it's got to be in the x squared plus bx equals c format. So if you'll notice, the x squared term and the x squared were on, and then the x term were on the left-hand side of my equation, and the constant was on the right-hand side. All right, so you have to rearrange it so the x squared and the x are on one side and the constant is on the other. You may have to do some adding and subtracting and combining terms to get it into that form. Step 2 is to complete the square, and I have this here, half of the b, so half of the coefficient of your x term, and then squared. And that's actually what I had if you wrote down what I had originally. Half of the coefficient of x term squared. That's all you have to remember, okay? That's the number you're going to add. Half of the x term and then square it. So half of, in this case, the b, half of b, and then square it. So that number is what you're going to add to both sides. Once you get that added to both sides, now you have a perfect square trinomial. So factor it, and it will be a perfect square because you made it into a perfect square. Then you're going to take the square root of both sides and solve for x. All right? Now, if you haven't quite gotten it written down, finish it up real quick while I get started on this one. So x squared plus 2x plus 15 equals 0. Now that's great if you're factoring, but we want to complete the square. Remember, when you're factoring, you want it to equal 0. But when you're completing the square, you want the constant term on the other side of the equation. Well, you can get it there. Just subtract it. All right? So x squared plus 2x equals, oh, and what I would do is leave a space there, equals negative 15, because you want to put in this third term. So leave space to do it. All right? Now you're on, so this is step 1. You've got it in the right form. So step 2, just complete the square. So to complete the square, we're going to look at this side of the equation. We're going to take this x term, half of it, half of 2 is 1, squared. 1 times 1 is 1. All right. Now don't forget to add the same thing to both sides. I can add that there and make this cool. This is a perfect square trinomial. But it will make our equation unbalanced if we don't add the same thing to the other side. Now we're going to factor, and if it helps you to factor it this way to remember, go ahead and do that. If you can go straight to the squared term, that's okay too. So we know x times x, we know 1 times 1, and they're both positive, and then 1 plus 1 is 2. Yep, we did it. We're good to go. And that's going to equal negative 14. Now, simplify this further. X plus 1 squared equals negative 14. And so we're going to take the square root of both sides. And now, okay, so now we've got x plus 1 equals, and now this square root of negative 14 is going to be I square root of 14. 14, remember, is just 2 times 7, so it's not 15, 14. I'm just making sure because this is not matching up with what I did in my notes, and I'm all confused. Oh, you know what? It's because I copied the problem down wrong on my, this will work. This will work. We'll just keep going. Okay, but what I had here was a 12. In my notes, I have a 12, and up here I have a 2. This works too. So here we go. And we didn't end up with a negative number. You probably, I don't know if your answers in your homework have any I's, but this will work. There's nothing wrong with this at all. This is 2 times 7. So now we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. So x equals negative 1 plus or minus, oh, I forgot the plus or minus I times the square root of 14, and you're finished. Sorry, I confused myself because I didn't, anyway. All right, let's do another one. Okay, step 1 is a little bit trickier here, but not too bad, right? You just need the x squared and the x term together on one side, and you need the constant term on the other side. So you've got the x squared on the left, and you've got the constant on the right. You just need to move the x term over. So just add it. So x squared plus 8x, don't forget to leave yourself some space, equals 29. What are you going to put in here? Well, it's always going to be plus because you're going to square it. Half of the x term, half of 8 is 4, and then square it. So 4 times 4 is 16. Don't forget now, step 3, add the same thing to both sides. You added 16 on this side, so add 16 on this side. And so now this should factor into x plus 4 squared. 4 times 4 is 16, and if we add 4 plus 4, that equals 8, so we're good to go. And that equals 20, 30, 45, so... And now this is exactly like what you did in the last lesson. Take the square root of both sides. X plus 4, don't forget it equals plus or minus the square root of 45. Let's simplify this here. 45 is 9 times 5, which is 3 times 3 times 5. So we can take out a 3 and a square root of 5. And now just subtract 4. So x equals -4 plus or minus 3 times the square root of 5. And that's it. So step 1, make sure that it's in the right format. And then step 2 is just completing that square. So the more you do it, the more it'll come and it'll be easier. And oh yeah, this makes sense. You just take that middle term, the x term, take the number in front of the x, take half of it, and then square it. And that number is what you're going to add to both sides every time. Don't forget to add it to both sides. And then just solve it the way you know to solve. All right, good luck. See you soon.